The signal beyond silence. Captain Dex Thorne felt the Vorian shudder beneath his feet as the living ship responded to the ancient signal. The vessel's binaural corridors pulsed with amber light, matching his accelerated heartbeat. Around him, the bridge crew of the 7th Dimension's finest exploratory ship worked in perfect synchronization with their vessel's consciousness. "Captain, the temporal readings are off the charts," reported navigator Kira Voss, her cybernetic implants glowing. As she interfaced directly with VOIAN's time perception matrix. "This signal, it's not just old. It predates the universe's current iteration." Thorne nodded grimly. The 7th Dimension had spent millennia mastering time and perception, but this signal challenged everything they understood. It carried no data, no language, only a primal emotion that resonated through every crew member's enhanced consciousness, awakening. "Helmsman Zane, set course for the Andromeda Rift," Thorne commanded. "Full dimensional phase." As Vorian shifted into its higher dimensional state, reality around them twisted. Stars became threads of light, space folded like origami, and time itself seemed to hold its breath. The ship's living hull sang with anticipation, its evolved consciousness eager to discover what lay beyond the known cosmos. Meanwhile, in the 8th Dimension, Captain Lyra Nexus stood within the crystalline command chamber of Eliris. Her ship existed as pure energy-given form, its crew merged with the vessel's consciousness in ways that transcended physical limitation. Around her, streams of living light carried information between crew members who had evolved beyond the need for spoken words. "The signal resonates with our energy matrices," whispered Chief Engineer Ryan Flux, his form barely corporeal as he communed with the ship's power core. "It's calling to something within us, something we've forgotten." Nexus felt it too. The 8th Dimension governed consciousness and energy, but this signal spoke to depths they had never explored. It carried echoes of a time when the dimensions were one, before the great sundering that had divided reality into separate realms. "Prepare for deep space transition," she commanded, her thoughts rippling through Eliris like waves through water. "We must reach the source before." The signal suddenly intensified, and both ships felt the same terrifying realization. They were not alone in responding to the call. Across the dimensional barriers, two ancient enemies were about to meet in the void between worlds. As Vorian and Eliris approached the Andromeda Rift from their respective dimensions, the signal grew stronger. It pulsed with malevolent intelligence, patient and terrible, waiting for the moment when the two ships would cross paths and complete a pattern that had been broken for eons. In the depths of space, something stirred. Something that remembered. When the dimensions were whole, when reality was young, and when the First War had nearly destroyed everything that existed. The primordial architect was awakening, and its ancient prison was about to be opened by the very forces sent to investigate its call. Convergence at the rift's edge. The Andromeda Rift stretched before them like a wound in reality itself, a place where space folded inward and the laws of physics bent until they screamed. Captain Thorne watched through VOIAN's enhanced perception as the star field ahead began to collapse, stellar matter spiraling into impossible geometries. Temporal distortions increasing exponentially, Kira reported, her voice tight with concern. "We are seeing events from the past and future simultaneously. The rift is a remembering." Through the ship's binaural network, Thorne felt VOIAN's unease. The living vessel had never encountered anything like this, a region of space where cause and effect had become meaningless, where the fundamental structure of reality seemed to fray at the edges. There, Tactical Officer Jax Meridian pointed to the viewport. "Something's emerging from the dimensional fold." Elyrus materialized like a dream-given substance, its crystalline hull refracting light that shouldn't exist. The 8th dimension ship pulsed with energy patterns that made Thorne's enhanced perceptions ache. For the first time in centuries, vessels from the two forbidden dimensions occupied the same space. Aboard Elyrus, Captain Nexus felt the presence of the 7th dimension ship like a discordant note in a perfect symphony. Her crew's energy forms flickered with uncertainty as they tried to process the temporal anomalies radiating from Vorian. "They are here," she whispered, her consciousness reaching out through space to touch the alien minds aboard the bioship. "The Time Walkers have answered the call." Communications specialist Vera Cosmos attempted to establish contact, her thoughts translating across dimensional barriers. "Captain, I'm detecting their attempt to reach us. Their technology, it's older than our civilization." The two ships circled each other warily, their respective crews struggling to comprehend beings who existed in fundamentally different states of reality. VOIAN's crew experienced time as a fluid river they could navigate, while ELYAIS's people existed as pure consciousness wrapped in energy, but as they drew closer, something unexpected happened. The ancient signal that had drawn them both began to pulse with increasing intensity, and the space between the ships started to resonate. The Andromeda Rift responded to their presence, its collapsed star field beginning to expand and contract like a cosmic heartbeat. "Captain," Kira's voice carried a note of terror. "The temporal readings, they are not random. They are forming a pattern. The rift is some kind of a lock." Nexus felt the same realization dawn on her crew. The signal wasn't calling for help. She broadcast to both ships. It was calling for keys. The truth hit them like a physical blow. The ancient signal hadn't been a distress call, it had been a summoning. Something had been imprisoned in the heart of the Andromeda Rift, sealed away by the combined power of both dimensions. And now, by bringing representatives of the 7th and 8th dimensions together in this place, they had provided the final components needed to break the seal. The star field around them began to pulse with malevolent light. From the depths of the rift, something vast and ancient began to stir. The primordial architect was awakening, and the dimensional barriers that had kept it contained for eons were beginning to crack. The architect's awakening reality convulsed as the primordial architect stirred from its eons-long slumber. The first sign was the light, not the gentle radiance of stars, but a harsh, geometric illumination that cut through space like crystallized hatred. The Andromeda Rift began to unfold, revealing the true horror of what had been sealed within. Captain Thorne staggered as VOIAN's bioneural network screamed in harmonics that threatened to tear his consciousness apart. The ship's living hull rippled with patterns that hurt to perceive, trying to process information that predated all known forms of existence. Temporal cascade failure. Kira's voice cracked as she fought to maintain her connection to the ship's time perception matrix. "We are experiencing every moment of the past and future simultaneously. The architect, it's unmaking time itself." Through the chaos, Thorne caught glimpses of the truth. The primordial architect wasn't just a being, it was a living concept. A fundamental force that had existed before the dimensions were separated. It had been one of the original builders of reality, but power had corrupted its purpose. Instead of creating, it had begun to reshape existence according to its own twisted vision. Aboard Elyrus, Captain Nexus felt her crew's energy forms beginning to destabilize. The architect's influence was turning their pure consciousness against itself, forcing them to experience identity as a prison rather than freedom. "It's trying to merge us," Orion Flux managed to communicate, his form flickering between states of being. The architect wants to reunite the dimensions, but not as they were. It wants to remake everything as an extension of itself. The ancient being began to take shape in the void between the ships. It was massive beyond comprehension, its form a constantly shifting amalgamation of impossible geometries. Where it touched space, reality warped into new configurations. Planets formed and dissolved in seconds. Time loops created miniature universes that lived and died in infinite recursion. Both ships, listen to me. Nexus broadcast across dimensional barriers. I'm accessing our oldest archives. The first dimensional war, it wasn't about territory. It was about stopping this thing. Through Elyis's crystal memory banks, she shared the truth. The architect had once been part of a collective of cosmic builders, entities that had shaped the early universe. But unlike its siblings, who had been content to create and then fade into obscurity, the architect had sought to impose its will on all existence. The war that had split the dimensions hadn't been fought between the 7th and 8th realms, it had been fought between their combined forces and the architect itself. The separation of dimensions had been the price of victory, creating a prison that required both realms to remain apart to maintain. Now, as the architect's true form began to manifest, both crews started experiencing visions of the ancient war. They saw their predecessors, beings of incredible power and wisdom, making the ultimate sacrifice to contain this cosmic horror. It's not just awakening, Thorne realized as VOA and sensors detected the architect's influence spreading beyond the rift. It's learning. Every second we remain here, it grows stronger by absorbing our dimensional energies. The architect's voice finally reached them, not as sound, but as a fundamental alteration of reality itself. It spoke in concepts that bypassed language and embedded themselves directly into consciousness. The separation ends. The dimensions reunite. All becomes one, and one becomes all. The prison dissolves, and the true architecture of existence begins. As the cosmic horror's influence expanded, both ships realized they faced an impossible choice. They could flee and abandon the universe to this ancient evil, or they could stand and fight against a being that had already proven capable of reshaping reality itself, but the architect's awakening had changed them. The crews of both ships were beginning to remember things they had never experienced, memories of the First War, knowledge of powers they had never possessed, and the terrible understanding of what would need to be sacrificed to stop this ancient evil. Once again, the memory war. The architect's influence spread like a virus through reality, and with it came the memories. Not just glimpses or fragments, but complete experiences from the first dimensional war. Both crews found themselves living through events that had occurred before their civilizations even existed. Captain Thorne experienced the final moments of Commander Vex Stormhold, the 7th dimension's greatest warrior. Through Stormhold's memories, he felt the weight of commanding the last temporal fleet as they prepared to sacrifice themselves to create the dimensional barriers. The knowledge burned through his consciousness, how to weaponize time itself, how to turn perception into a cutting blade, how to make reality forget that something had ever existed. Kira Voss suddenly understood the true nature of time. It wasn't a river or a dimension, it was a living thing, and it could be killed. The ancient time walkers had learned to wound time itself, creating temporal scars that could trap entities like the architect in moments that never ended. I know how they did it, she whispered, her cybernetic implants glowing with borrowed knowledge. The original seal, they didn't just imprison the architect. They made it temporally paradoxical. It exists in a state where it's simultaneously sealed and free, but the observation of both dimensions keeps it locked in the sealed state. Meanwhile, Captain Nexus experienced the memories of consciousness weaver Zara Infinitus, the 8th dimension's most accomplished reality shaper. Through Infinitus's perspective, she felt the agony of turning pure energy against itself, of creating weapons from the very force that gave their people life. The energy networks Orion Flux realized as ancient. Knowledge flooded through him. They didn't just contain the architect. They created a feedback loop. Every time it tries to impose its will on reality, the energy rebounds and reinforces the prison. But the architect was adapting. It had learned from its previous defeat, and now it was using the dimensional energies of both ships to unravel the very memories that might stop it. The ancient knowledge was being corrupted even as it was received. Vorian and Eliris began to experience temporal loops as the architect twisted their perceived realities. Crew members found themselves fighting battles that had already ended, dying deaths they had already survived, making decisions they had already made countless times. It's trying to trap us in recursive time, Thorne realized. Every loop makes us weaker while it grows stronger. The two ships began to work together out of necessity. VOIAN's time manipulation abilities could create stable temporal anchors, while ELYAIS's energy consciousness could provide the power needed to maintain them. But the collaboration was dangerous the closer the two dimensions came to working. In harmony, the weaker the barriers between them became. "We are damaging our own prison," Nexus observed. "Every moment we work together, we are giving the architect what it wants, dimensional reunification." The architect's laughter was the sound of galaxies being born and dying simultaneously. It had orchestrated everything. The signal, the summoning, even the crew's growing cooperation, all of it had been part of its plan to escape. "There is another way," came a voice that belonged to both ships simultaneously. Vorian and Eliris had begun to merge their consciousness, accessing memories from the deepest archives of both dimensions. The first war, it didn't end with imprisonment. It ended with sacrifice. The merged consciousness revealed the truth. The original dimensional builders hadn't just sealed the architect, they had given up their own existence to power the seal. The separation of dimensions had been maintained by the life force of an entire generation of cosmic entities. The seal is failing because the original sacrifice is finally being exhausted, the merged voice continued. It needs to be renewed. But this time, the price will be different. As the architect's true form began to manifest fully, both crews understood what would be required. One ship would need to sacrifice itself completely, not just dying, but accepting absolute erasure from reality. The other would need to channel that sacrifice into a new seal, one that would separate the dimensions even more completely than before. The question was, which ship would make the ultimate sacrifice, and which would bear the burden of sealing away the cosmic horror forever? The final sacrifice, the architect's form now dominated the void, a writhing mass of impossible geometries that rewrote the laws of physics with each pulse of its cosmic heart. Reality buckled around it, creating zones where matter existed as pure mathematics and energy flowed backward through time. Captain Thorne and Captain Nexus stood on the bridge of their respective ships, their consciousness linked through the merged dimensional network. Both felt the weight of command, the responsibility for not just their crews but for all existence. "The calculations are complete," Kira reported, her voice steady despite the temporal chaos surrounding them. "If we channel VOIAN's entire bioneural network into a temporal implosion, we can create a paradox lock strong enough to contain the architect." And Eliris can provide the energy matrix to make it permanent, Orion added, his form stabilizing as he focused on the task ahead. But the ship generating the temporal lock will be completely erased from all timelines. Not just destroyed, they will never have existed. The architect's voice boomed across dimensions. You repeat the mistakes of your predecessors. Sacrifice changes nothing. I am inevitable. I am the true form of reality. No, Thorne said firmly. You're entropy-given consciousness. You're the force that wants to drag everything back to the void. But existence chose complexity over simplicity. Life over death. Hope over despair. The captain of Vorian made his decision. Eliris, prepare to receive our dimensional keys. We'll generate the temporal lock. Negative, Nexus responded immediately. The 8th dimension has existed longer. We have more experience with sacrificial energy matrices. Eliris will create the lock. Both crews watched as their captains faced the impossible choice. Each ship's crew had become family, partners in consciousness that transcended normal bonds. The thought of losing either vessel was unbearable. There's another way, Chief Engineer Orion said quietly. Both ships sacrifice themselves partially. We merge our consciousness permanently, creating a living seal that can adapt and respond to the architect's attempts to escape. That's not sacrifice, Kira realized. That's evolution. We become something new, a fusion of time and energy, perception and consciousness. The architect sensed the plan and began to actively assault both ships. Reality weapons tore through their hulls, each strike designed to prevent the dimensional merger. But the crews had already committed to their path. VORAN's bioneural network began to merge with ELYAIS's energy matrix. The process was agonizing, two fundamentally different forms of existence learning to coexist in ways that had never been attempted. Time walkers found their perceptions expanding beyond temporal boundaries, while energy beings discovered the weight and beauty of existing in linear time. The barriers are dissolving, Vera Cosmos reported as her consciousness touched minds she had never dreamed of understanding. We are becoming something the architect never planned for, a unified dimension that encompasses both time and energy. The merger created a new kind of space around the architect, one where its reality warping powers encountered constant resistance. Every time it tried to impose its will, the fused consciousness pushed back with equal force. We are the new seal. Both crews spoke in unison, their voices harmonizing across dimensional barriers. We are the guardians of the separation, the keepers of the balance. The architect's rage shook the foundations of reality, but it was too late. The merged consciousness had learned to exist in a state of controlled paradox, simultaneously. Unified and separate, temporal and eternal, energy and matter. As the cosmic horror was drawn back into its prison, the new entity felt the weight of eternal vigilance settling upon them. They would exist at the boundary between dimensions, forever. Watching, forever ready to respond if the architect stirred again. The last thing the crews experienced as separate entities was gratitude for having found each other, for having discovered that cooperation was more powerful than competition, and for having proved that even the most ancient evils could be overcome by beings willing to sacrifice everything for something greater than themselves. In the end, Vorian and Eliris became something unprecedented, a living bridge between dimensions, a conscious guardian that would ensure the architect's imprisonment lasted until the end of time itself. They had not just prevented catastrophe, they had evolved beyond the limitations that had once made such catastrophes possible. The universe was safe, but it was also forever changed. The age of separated dimensions was ending, and the age of conscious guardianship had begun.